I had a conversation with a good friend of mine about basically this business endeavor that he had done, and over a long period of time, it ended up not working out. But in that whole period of time, he never reached out to me once. I was like, why? And what transpired from his reaction is kind of the point of this video. I'm going to talk about that conversation, and I think it absolutely affects so many people and limits their capacity and why they aren't successful and some of the underlying reasons. And at the very end, I'll give you kind of a framework that has helped me through this year particularly, because it's been a very hard year for me, but hopefully it helps you. The big theme of this, though, is that no one cares, just win. Because until you win, effort always goes unnoticed. You just have to get used to it. It's the way of the world. I remember I asked him, I said, hey, do you mind if I make a piece of content about this? He was like, sure, but what about? From our long conversation. I said, you said this thing, if I'm gonna fail, I'd rather it be on me. And he's like, well, what about that was interesting to you? He said, I honestly needed to have that happen to realize that I can't do it on my own. Otherwise, it'd be easy to put that blame on somebody else. And so I responded with, how could you put blame on someone else? And he said, well, saying like, hey, I failed because I used someone else's system, or I failed because, so-and-so didn't keep their end of the deal, or didn't do their responsibilities, or I failed because they ruined my business by doing X, Y, and Z. And they're all basically just like cop-outs when your mind gets kind of weak, right? They're kind of like excuses. But I hate to say that I've witnessed this happen too many times. And this is all him saying this. And I said, fault's funny because it just doesn't matter. No one thinks to themselves like, hey, that worked out really well for him. I wonder whose fault it is. We only think fault in the negative. We don't think fault in the positive, right? I bring this up to him and he says, I have a visceral understanding of the fact that I need better systems, better leverage and better people around me to, make that next chapter happen. And so I have to stop hiding. In thinking about this, I was like, no one asks whose fault it is when it works. And the reality is that 2 years from now, when you think about the championship Super Bowl game or the quarterbacks who've hit these records, no one's like, hey, that guy got really good calls from the ref. Hey, it was really raining that day. No one remembers. They just remember who won. And so I think that this is a really interesting thought line that I wanted to kind of dive into, because the individual in question did something in the fitness space. And so I reached out and was like, why didn't you ask me for help? And this was basically his response, was that he wanted the failure to be on his own if he was going to fail. And it was such in contrast to how I've seen the world that I thought it was worth making, because for any of you who have this worldview, I think it does you a tremendous disservice. Because my perspective has always been, it will always be my fault and no one will care what I got help or who I got help from. They will just know whether I won or lost, period.
Hormozi's final words hang in the air with the weight of an undeniable truth. But to stop there, at the simple verdict of winning or losing, is to see only the symptom, not the disease. The real question isn't whether people will remember how you won, but why so many of us instinctively choose a path that makes winning almost impossible. His friend's story isn't a unique case of pride. It is a mirror reflecting a deep, fundamental human wiring that we must confront if we ever hope to achieve our potential. This journey isn't about navigating the world's judgment of you. It is about understanding and then winning the private war you wage against yourself long before you ever step onto the battlefield of business or life. The most significant battles are not fought in boardrooms or marketplaces, but in the silent, 6-inch space between your ears. It is there that the real victories are decided, often before the first step is even taken. It's a war of perception, identity, and fear, and until you learn its terrain, you will remain your own most formidable opponent. The opponent in this war is not circumstance, competition, or a lack of resources. It is something far more intimate and cunning, the fragile ego. It's that part of you that whispers insidious justifications, framing self-sabotage as a virtue. It tells you it is better to fail honorably on your own terms than to succeed with the help of others. It masquerades as responsibility, as fierce independence, but at its core, it is a defense mechanism rooted in pure terror. We must see it for what it is, the guardian of a fixed self-image, an identity meticulously built on being perceived as competent, intelligent, and self-sufficient. Its prime directive is not to achieve the external goal, but to protect this internal image at all costs. Like a nervous monarch who cares more for the integrity of his crown than the prosperity of his kingdom, the ego will sacrifice real-world progress to prevent the slightest scratch on its perceived authority. It is the silent saboteur that convinces you to bleed out alone rather than accept a life-saving hand that would force it to admit it wasn't invincible. Why is this ego so profoundly terrified of asking for help? because it doesn't perceive a request for guidance as a strategy, it perceives it as a public confession of fraud. For the person who has built their entire identity around having it all figured out, a simple question like, "How do I do this?" is tantamount to identity annihilation. It threatens to shatter the entire narrative they have sold to themselves, and more importantly, to the people whose opinions they value. It's a fear of not just looking dumb for a moment, but of permanently erasing the very image of who you believe you are supposed to be in the eyes of the world. This is why the ego will gladly accept the tangible, catastrophic loss of a business. That is a measurable, external failure. The alternative, this perceived spiritual death of the self-image, feels infinitely worse. It is the ultimate vulnerability, the admission that the carefully curated protagonist of your own life story is, in fact, flawed and incomplete. And that is a truth the ego will fight to the death to conceal. The only way to win this war is to change the very rules of engagement. You must relocate your sense of self from the brittle world of perception to the solid ground of action. This is the antidote. You must move your identity away from static, fragile labels like "I am smart" or "I am successful," and anchor it in dynamic, controllable behaviors. Your identity must become, "I am the person who learns, I am the person who shows up every day, and most importantly, I am the person who is willing to ask for help to solve a problem." This is the foundation of an anti-fragile identity. A static label breaks under pressure. The moment a smart person fails, their identity is threatened. But an identity based on action doesn't break, it adapts. It feeds on challenges and criticism because they are merely inputs for the next action. This shift turns the entire dynamic on its head. Asking for help is no longer a threat to your identity. It becomes the purest expression of it. Once your identity is rooted in the act of learning, the fear of looking stupid undergoes a profound transformation. It ceases to be a threat and becomes a tool. It becomes a currency. This paragraph asks you to see humility as a form of capital you can consciously deploy. You can choose to spend a small amount of your pride to buy an immense, time-saving portion of knowledge. You can spend a moment of feeling foolish to purchase a decade of someone else's experience. Paying for a mastermind you feel you aren't ready for. Asking a basic question to an expert. Publicly admitting ignorance. These are not signs of weakness. They are the most sophisticated and highest leverage investments you can make in your own progress. The world's most successful people are not those who avoid looking dumb. They are the ones who are most willing to make this trade over and over again, because they understand that the short-term cost to their ego is an insignificant price for the long-term, compounding rewards of wisdom. This new identity requires a new operating system for your mind. It requires what we can call the alchemist's mindset, inspired by Hormozi's Gryffindor metaphor. It only takes in that which makes it stronger. This is the ultimate reframe. With this mental model installed, no experience is ever truly negative. A business failure, a harsh criticism, a painful lesson, they are no longer wounds to your ego that cause you to retreat. They are simply raw materials for your growth. An angry client's email is no longer an attack. It's a free data set on how to improve your product. A failed project is not a dead end. It's a tuition payment for a critical lesson in strategy. The alchemist actively seeks out these experiences because they know that pressure and fire are what forge the strongest steel. This mindset shifts you from being a passive victim of circumstance to an active creator who transmutes every obstacle into fuel. To truly adopt this alchemist mindset, we must first dismantle our ingrained relationship with pain and hardship. Let's begin by deconstructing the illusion of voluntary suffering. The next time you face a setback, a financial loss, a rejection, a plan that goes awry, you must pause and ask a brutally honest question. What does this actually change about what I will do in the next 24 hours? Does it change where you will sleep tonight? Does it change what food you will eat for dinner? Does it change the people in your life who truly matter? In the vast majority of cases, especially in the early stages of a journey, the answer is nothing. The material reality of your life is completely unchanged, yet we choose to enter a state of profound mental anguish. We opt into suffering, recognizing that this feeling is a choice, not an inevitable consequence, is the first step toward reclaiming your power. You can choose to feel the sting of the lesson without choosing to drown in the voluntary ocean of misery. The second pillar of deconstructing hardship is to understand the profound fallibility of your own mind. Your memory is not a high-fidelity video recorder meticulously documenting every second of your life. It is a storyteller. It's a scrapbook of emotional snapshots. It excels at remembering peaks of joy and valleys of despair, but it is terrible at remembering the long, mundane stretches in between. That month of grueling work, anxiety, and sleepless nights that you fear? In a year, your memory will have compressed it into a single, vague thought. That was a tough month. The fear of prolonged, unbearable suffering is a cognitive illusion projected by your present mind. The actual memory of the pain will be a fleeting echo, a compressed file. Knowing this is a superpower. It disarms fear by revealing that its greatest threat, unending misery, is a bluff. It grants you the courage to endure the temporary storm, because you know it will barely occupy a single page in the vast library of your life. Now, with this understanding, we can finally grasp the true, profound meaning behind the mantra, just win. It is not a cold, ruthless command to crush others. It is the final, logical instruction that follows a deep internal transformation. It means, just win the war against your fragile ego. Just win the right to define yourself by your relentless actions, not by the fickle perceptions of others. Win the freedom that comes from being willing to look stupid to become wise. Win the battle over voluntary suffering, and win against the illusionary fear of a pain that your future self will barely remember. When you have won these crucial internal victories, when your identity is anti-fragile and your mindset is that of an alchemist, the external win that the world sees is no longer a matter of hope or luck. It becomes an inevitable consequence. It is simply the outward manifestation of a well-ordered and unconquerable inner world. If this deeper insight into the architecture of achievement resonated with you, subscribe for more analyses that explore the philosophies behind success. Share in the comments how this principle might shift your own perspective on asking for help. To get the full original context from the source, and to hear these powerful ideas directly from the man himself, make sure to watch Alex's complete video, which is linked for you in the description below.